Welcome, everybody, back to another episode of Woven Wings Live, where we bring you wisdom and tools for vibrant living. I'm your host, Gabe Crane. I'm joined by my co-host, Rahul Deedwania. And if you enjoy listening to us, please leave us a review wherever you are checking us out, whether that's on our podcast channels, on YouTube. You can see a video of this interview on YouTube if you're not already there with us. You can also follow us along by clicking the links in the show description. You can join our newsletter and become part of the broader conversation. We'd love to hear from you if you are tuning in. Today's episode, we are continuing in season 4, which has some different names, but I like to call it God for Ordinary People, God from many perspectives. Today, our topic is on the Great Continuum of Consciousness and Spiritual Transformation, and our guest is George Boyd, a meditation teacher, counselor, poet, and author. And I'll introduce George in more detail in a moment. But Rahul, I welcome again. It's good to be back here with you, man. We have had 3 episodes in this season so far, and they have all our guests have been lovely, and they've all come from a more Judeo-Christian background, a more Western background. We had Rabbi Adina Allen. We had Heath, who is a Christian who practices the Enneagram. And then we had Paul Marshall Gillen, who is sharing with us last month about his awakening experience and embrace of Jesus Christ. So today we have a different angle on things. George is coming from, I'll let George, I don't want to speak to it too much, but George is coming from a more Eastern orientation in his training and backgrounds, some of the perspectives on spirituality, on God, on what the heck we're doing here, and what the purpose of life is. So I'm just curious, as we make that transition, what's alive for you today? What are you excited about in our conversation? And what are you looking forward to talking to George about?
Yeah, thanks, Gabe, for kicking us off, and excited to be here with you as always. I think the topic that I appreciated you painting the picture of season 4 so far, because I've been thinking a lot about, where am I at myself in my spiritual quest or in my spiritual journey, and in some of the materials that George sent us in advance, he differentiated between spiritual longing and spiritual curiosity. And I think I'll let George explain that in much more detail later. But as I took it, right, spiritual longing is when you feel deep, from deep within yourself, from your spirit, desire to return to the great spirit, so to speak. And then spiritual curiosity is as I took it, is much more intellectual. It's seeking understanding and knowledge. And that distinction was resonated with me, because I'm like, oh, that's where I am right now, right? And I think about what we're doing with season 4. It's talking to people from these different traditions, gaining knowledge, gaining a broad-based understanding of different ways to connect to this spiritual path, different ways, different institutions or practices or sanghas to be a part of, different knowledge bases that ultimately all point to a similar, set of truths, but have slightly different spins on them, as I see it. And I just find myself eager and excited to talk to someone like George, who brings what I understand to be an integrated perspective, and something that, frankly, it feels pretty innovative too. It's not just examining an ancient wisdom tradition, but bringing it into experience and bringing it into the modern day. And I think that's something that I sense, a lot of people are longing for, right? It's something that's, that's meeting them where they're at in terms of what the modern experience is like as well. So with all that said, I'm looking forward to seeing where our conversation goes.
Awesome. Yeah, I resonate with that, and one of the things that I'm excited to chat with George about here, after looking over some of the materials that you were referring to, Rahul, is you mentioned there that there are all these different traditions that are kind of maybe pointing us to the same place, but with maybe slight variations or different language. And I think that's a question for me: is are they pointing us all to the same place, or are we talking about really different things? And if they are different, how different are they? And what are the implications for that? How do we bridge that gap? How do we choose and embark on a path that leads us somewhere? And if you go down path A and I go down path B, could we meet up later down, downstream? So all that's to say, George is a really seasoned and expert teacher here, a master meditation teacher, and we're very lucky to have him. George has been studying and practicing meditation since 1965 and teaching a system of integral meditation that he developed himself since 1983. George is a writer, a poet, a metavisional reader, and a master teacher. He is the founder of Mudra Ashram Institute of Spiritual Studies and editor and publisher of Mudra Ashram Publishing. George is the author of 19 books. He's self-published 6 workbooks for meditation classes, and is also a prolific poet. And as he asked us to emphasize, which I'm excited to dive in with him, George is a spiritual cartographer who has mapped the entire Great Continuum of Consciousness. And so on that note, George, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us today and being present for having this conversation with us. You're welcome to come online and into the room with us. You could flip your camera on, turn on your mic. How are you doing this morning, George?
I'm feeling good.
Awesome. So just to start out, I think that phrase, the framework, the Great Continuum of Consciousness, which just before the show you referred to as kind of your, well, I think I'm paraphrasing or I might butcher it here, but your life's work, kind of your greatest contribution. For folks who are not familiar with that, I mean, I get an image, a continuum, a band of light, a band of consciousness. But what is the Great Continuum of Consciousness? And perhaps, how would you relate that to the concept of God, which is very central to our season this year on the show?
Okay, well, in a nutshell, the Great Continuum of Consciousness represents the entire continuum of mind. Now, the first level of the mind we experience when we move off the waking state of consciousness is what we call the conscious mind. And many people have had experiences of the conscious mind. This is your present time experience. This is what I'm seeing and sensing right now. This is what I'm feeling right now. This is what I'm thinking right now. And within the conscious mind, this is the center of what we call the ego. This is the part of you that is embedded in your human life. This is the experiencer, the one who is saying, this is my life. This is how I'm trying to cope with all the things that are going on around me. And it's also the part of us that accesses memory. Now, where did I leave my keys? The next band of the mind is called the subconscious mind. So this is the repository of the memory and the creative intelligence within us that people have called the chakras. I like to use the example that when you court somebody, how is it that you know to go and reach out and take their hand? There's like an internal intelligence that says this is what you do when you're doing courtship. It's also the repository of the aspects of our nature that operate in the sleep, in the dreaming and sound sleep stages. And then we have the metaconscious mind, which are the executive functions of the personality. Our ability to make long-term commitments to work, to family, to education, to people we're caring for. The ability to use our social skills and our humor, we call the persona. The ability to get in touch with our core values, what we call the conscience. Our ability to plan and schedule and set goals, our concrete mind. Our ability to use our intelligence and all the skills that we learned in school, which we call the intellect. The ability to check in with ourselves to find out what's going on. And at the core of this personality, we have the element of will. And this is your free choice. Which restaurant do I go to? What car do I buy? You have free choice. You look at the options, you say, this looks like the best choice. You make a choice. And that changes your life. And at the very core of the personality are two aspects. The first aspect is what we call the human self. And that's the active aspect of us. And then beyond that is a state of being. Some people call it the voidness. And it's a state of being one with everything around you. It's a very, very peaceful place, like no problems. I always think about the movie The Lion King, where they're going Hakuna Matata, right? And this is the state of being, no problems. Oh, okay, cool. I'm here. Now, beyond that, we have the superconscious mind. And the superconscious mind, we can roughly divide it into several different sections. It's a continuum of light. So the first section of the superconscious mind is what we call the subtle realm. It has two parts. The lower subtle contains the archetypes, the great ideas, the symbols of very primitive religions. Think about a religion where they say, do you see that mountain over there? That's God. All of us have come from the top of that mountain, so do not touch that mountain. It is sacred. And so you have many, many primitive religions. Any of your viewers who have studied anything about cultural anthropology know that there are many, many ideas about the divine, and some of them are very simple. Now, in the middle subtle, you have the band that we have the band where you encounter many of the great world civilizations. So your East Indian civilization, your Chinese civilization, your Greco-Roman civilizations, your Mesopotamian and Egyptian civilizations, and you might say the religions of the Levant, your European civilizations, your civilizations such as the Indonesian and Tibetan. And then we have our modern technological civilization. And in many of these world systems, they have a pantheon of gods and goddesses. And in our modern technological system, in our modern technological civilization, we also have gods and goddesses. There are sports heroes. There are celebrities. It's our sports teams. So we don't have a deity per se, but we do have people that we look up to and worship. Now, slightly beyond that is I want to say it's the dark side of humanity. And it's a level that we term in our traditions called the lower astral. And this is where a lot of the issues with drugs, with sexuality, with criminality, with political corruption, with enslaving other people come from. And it's also the repository of those people who force their will on other people through fear, through intimidation. You think about the dictators of the world, people who are evil and cruel and just do heinous things. A lot of them are anchored in this lower astral plane. At the very top of the subtle realm, we have a level we call it the subtle illumined mind, and this is like a mirror of all the stages of the path ahead. Now, once you transition out of the subtle realm, and when we say you transition out, we're talking about this higher integration center that dwells in the superconscious mind. Generically, we call it a ensouling entity. In the subtle realm, people dwell as the soul spark. Now, once you enter the planetary realm, there are a series of bands through which the soul evolves. Now, the first is the level of what we call the biophysical universe. And here you get into touch with nature and civilization. You kind of look at the two sides. You discover your sexuality and parenting. You learn about the phylogenetic history of all life. Think about Darwin. We have the picture of our entire Earth's history going back to the creation of the Earth, when it formed from the amalgamation of primitive matter, going back to the very creation of the universe, the Big Bang. And in this biophysical universe is where a lot of our modern cosmology comes from, our modern scientific cosmology comes from. The next band of the planetary is what we call the abstract mind plane. And you have a series of subplanes or themes that are on this level. And the first one, we call it the body-mind programming subplane. And this is where people learn about sports. Did you play sports when you were a child? You notice you started to gain mastery of your body and you could run faster, play a little harder. Well, you were guiding that process to improve your performance. There's a temple of science. All of the collective knowledge of science is contained at this level of the continuum. Temple of art. All of the expressions of art are contained at this level of continuum. Temple of philosophy. This is where all of our philosophical ideas nest. And this is where you learn how to think about thinking, how to deeply think about things. And then there's the Akashic record subplane. You may have heard about the Akasha. Some of you have read about it. A lot of fanciful ideas about it. But the Akashic record is a moment-by-moment recording of your experience in this and all of your alternate lives. So when we talk about past incarnations, those who gain the requisite ability to meditate and become sensitive to this level can actually remember their past lives. I say to people, do not believe in past lives until you actually know and experience that you lived before. And beyond that is a level we call the dynamic creation subplane. And this is where people start to take charge of their lives. They say, this is what I want in my life. This is what I want in my relationship. This is what I want in my career. This is what I want in my community. And you start to make these things happen. And at the highest level of this abstract mind plane, as we call it, is the universal mind subplane. And these are the universal laws. So we say the law of love. We say, well, I have a relationship right now. The law of love is operating in me. I have a loving relationship. I'm missing that. It means that something is blocking me from experience that which is my birthright. Now, the next band of the continuum is called the psychic realm. And a lot of our New Age community inhabits this level of the continuum. So we have at one level, you learn about the dynamics of creation and destruction. At the very top of this level, we call it the materialization and dematerialization subplane. That's a good woo-woo name. At the very top of it is what's called the law of attraction. And so you've seen all the aspects of destruction. You've seen all the aspects of creation. It asks you, what do you want? What do you want to create for your life in the world around you? There's a level in which you learn about psychic powers. There's a level in which you learn about using the divinatory arts. Think astrology, tarot, numerology, learning about the alternative healing methods like homeopathy, sound healing. Then you reach a level we call the heavenly realm subplane. And this is where people start to see, quote unquote, the spirits of the dead, and they commune with guides, and you see a form of God at that level, and the Hebrew prophets. And this is a level at which has spawned a lot of different, I want to say, revelatory religions. The next level is a real fun one. And this is the level in which people encounter the extraterrestrials. We call it the Pleiadian vortex subplane. And at that very highest level, that you find the Galactic Brotherhood. Those of you who like Star Trek, you're going to like that plate. And then the next level is what we call the Astro Form subplane. And here you have, I guess you might say, sort of like a representation of every personality that's ever lived. And some people who channel will tap into these different beings, and they'll be able to channel them and get guidance from them. Now, whether or not that's actually what the person would say, at least they're bringing in some information. And the very highest level, you learn how to be a psychic guide. Then we have the wisdom plane, where you start looking at the seeds you planted in your lives. You say, is this what I really want? So you remove it, you plant something else. You learn about forgiveness and understanding. And you learn about your native gift, your native contribution to the creation. Now, in the first initiation, we talk about 3 different levels. Now, the first level is, you might say, the level of God in history. Now, depending upon the viewpoint of the soul, and in our writing, we talk about what are called the 7 rays. Imagine that these are parallel perspectives on exactly the same terrain. So, for example, if your soul going through the first initiation is on the first ray, you're going to see the archetypes of the classical Jewish religion. On the second ray, the archetypes of democracy. On the third ray, you're going to see the archetypes of Catholicism. On the fourth ray, you're going to see the archetypes of the Essenes and what they call the angelic healers.
Fifth George, ray, just to jump in on this for a second with you, to make sure I'm tracking what you're saying by you will see. What exactly does that mean? I think what I'm picturing as you've laid out this map is there's almost like a set of rungs that through deliberate practice we can access these different, use the word planes, different planes of consciousness. And as I'm understanding it, once you're there, you're tapping into all of the knowledge and the experience up to date that maps to ties to the how you were describing it. Is am I understanding that right, that you can initiate people to access deeper levels experientially of consciousness, and then literally they will see what in some form the descriptions that you were just giving for each of those planes?
Okay, so the part of us that quote unquote sees this, it holds it within its intuitive field of knowledge, is the soul or the higher self. Now, the soul or higher self dwells at a certain stable point along this continuum. In our tradition, we call this a nodal point. Now, normally, if a person is just living a decent life, they're following their dharma, as they say in Buddhism. You're living a good life. You're doing the things you need to do. You're taking care of business at work. You're taking care of your family. You're not doing any heinous things. Usually within an 11 or 12-year period, you wear through this unconscious material that dwells between one nodal point and another, and you move. Now, it is possible to speed up this rate of transformation through using a selected transformational method that unfolds your ensouling entity. So if you dwell within the planetary realm, there is a particular way of drawing down the divine light of spirit. If you've ever taken a magnifying glass and held it in the sun, and you see it actually will burn, well, this divine light actually burns this unconscious material that dwells between one nodal point and another. And you open this scope of intuitive knowledge so that these things that I'm talking about you actually experience them at your deepest level.
Got it. And just one clarification there, George. When you say you experience it at the deepest level, could you describe what that feels like? I think I'm still trying to grasp exactly what this looks and feels like.
Okay. I want to say that there are 3 chords that connect your waking state of consciousness with the deeper levels of your mind. The first is the thread of faith. And I think some of your guests that you've had on have talked a lot about that. The thread of faith remembers some aspect of the divine that they believe is the divine we all should believe in. And through that, you have the experience of faith and belief. Now, the second aspect, and that comes through the heart. The second is the point between the eyebrows, and this is where our attention dwells. So any of your listeners who have experienced mindfulness, you're collecting your attention, so you're present. Well, when you move along this thread of consciousness through the centers of the conscious mind and the subconscious mind and the metaconscious mind and up into the superconscious mind, eventually you reach a state where your attention becomes fully aware of this ensouling entity. And then as you are able to awaken your awareness into that, you are open to that entire vast sphere of knowledge. And that's where you experience this. Now, we say that third thread is what we call the intuitive thread. And this is like when you ask your soul a question. Well, why am I here? And then that voice comes down and says, you're here to buy Baskin's Robbins ice cream. That is the whole purpose of your existence. Well, I hope your soul is not saying that to you. But this being said, the 3 chords. So the experiential thread is what we use in meditation. So typically in a lot of religions, they will use the thread of faith, and then they will ask through that thread of faith, ask whatever form of God they're relating to, well, please answer my questions, please take care of my needs, please help me overcome these obstacles. But the experiential part comes through the attention. So we need to train ourselves to move along this thread of consciousness to be able to actually experience what's in the conscious mind, what's in the subconscious mind, what's in the metaconscious mind, what's up in the superconscious mind. And so when you unite your attention with that, your ensouling entity, then at that point you have access to that entire sphere of knowledge that you've opened.
So, George, just to link it back to this buzzword of God, right? So I think as Rahul spoke about, I'm getting this image of this thread that, and you just use that word too, that I'm traveling inside through these different planes of experience to greater and greater states of understanding and realization about things. So I'm getting that it's an internal journey. And for folks who are, looking at this idea of there being a higher power or a some sort of sense of totality in the world, how do we link these two concepts? Are they related?
Well, I often say that inner space is curved. So you're looking on inner space and you look on what appears to be on your inner horizon. You say, that's God. So, for example, a person traveling through the biophysical universe looks on the inner horizon. They say, universe. Person moves to the abstract mind plane. They say, universal mind. Person in the psychic realm. They look on the inner horizon. The light of the Father, Mother, God. They look on the wisdom plane. The golden sun. They look in the first exoteric initiation and they say, oh, the form of God that is in history that is expressing through my social movement, through my religion. They go to the first mesoteric and they look on the inner horizon. They say, oh, the Heavenly Father God surrounded by the saints. And then they go into the second initiation. They look on the inner horizon. They say, oh, the central sun surrounded by the ascended masters. And they go into the, yeah. So every
right.
level of the continuum has another universal form. And that universal form basically is like a hub where every single living being unites. So imagine a wheel, but imagine that wheel has billions and billions of spokes. We all are one spoke going to that universal nexus. And so, depending on where you are viewing the other side of the continuum from where you are, then that's going to look like God to you. In the Buddhist scriptures, Buddha is quoted as saying, veil after veil will lift, but veil upon veil will appear beyond.
So maybe another way, I appreciate that. Another way of exploring this would be to say, okay, so here's this continuum of consciousness. Sounds like there's a journey that we're going on to burn through the unconscious material and move ourselves further along this band, this, continuum. Where does it end up? Where does it take us? Or another way of putting it is, what is the point? What is I think in some of the materials you sent, you talked about the intrinsic soul purpose. What are we doing? Is the point to get to the end? Is there a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow? Or is it an endless journey? What are we doing here? And what's the value of knowing this map, right? Where does the map lead us?
Okay. So you mentioned something called intrinsic soul purpose. So there are really two aspects of soul purpose. Most people ask, well, why am I here in the world? What am I supposed to be doing? And the soul says, you're supposed to be an artist. And so I want you to go and take art classes. That's expressed or extrinsic soul purpose. Intrinsic soul purpose is the developmental pathway for the soul. And as you develop as the soul, moving through the subtle realm and the planetary realm, and the next octave, which we call the transplanetary realm, and the cosmic, and your aligned supercosmic path, and the 8 paths of the transcendental, ultimately you reach a state that we call the infinite stage. As you open up at each level, you're gaining new knowledge. You may be gaining certain new virtues or love or compassion. You may be gaining certain new abilities. So think about it that you're using this much of your potential, a thimble of your potential, but yet you have infinite potential within you. In the Sikh religion, they say every man has got a ruby in his bundle, but because he does not know how to get it out, he is a pauper. And so if you have the keys to transformation, you can turn all of that potential into actuality. And this is where you have the beings that we call the masters. They talk about the masters of the hierarchy of light, the yogi preceptors, the great masters that dwell in the first cosmic initiation, the cosmic masters, the super cosmic gurus who have purview over an entire super cosmic path. Vast consciousness, or a Satguru in a transcendental path.
So is the point of that? Why would you want to do that? It might sound like a silly question, but what is the benefit of tapping into that or discovering the ruby? Is it a good feeling? Is it a pat on the back or a gold star? Do we pass the test? What does it give us?
Okay, well, what it gives you is it gives you the deepest fulfillment that you cannot even imagine, the greatest fulfillment that brings. It is truly ineffable and beyond words. And I guess the analogy that comes to mind is many people look at the world like little children. They say, well, the world is like this. But we want to grow up. We want to fully become what we are meant to be. And so growing spiritually is a way of doing that. Opening up all of our potential. Right now, we're operating at whatever capacity we are, but there is so much, much more. And to be immersed in having all of this knowledge and all of this grace and love and virtue and these incredible abilities that come as a result of being able to awaken your full potential. It is, well, I suppose that if people really understood what it was, they would recognize the infinite value of doing this.
Yeah, and George, what you just said got me thinking about one of my questions at the start of the show, right? Was I'm feeling my sense of spiritual curiosity being piqued a lot and fed and nourished in this conversation, right? Because you provided this rich map. And for those that are listening, we'll drop a link into the show description that George has published a lot of this stuff. So you can see it visually as well. And I'm noticing, hey, that part is eager, right? It's soaking all this in. And then there's the other part of me that's wondering, how do I tap into spiritual longing, right? Which feels much deeper. It feels much more holistic, right? What you said, hey, I suppose if people knew what it felt like, this ineffable feeling of being one with the highest plane of consciousness, they would all pursue it, right? And I feel like even, for one, many people just aren't interested in this. Even for someone like me, who I'm like, I am interested in it, I don't know if I could say that I have that level of longing. And so I'm curious, like, what is it that activates longing? Is it just time and readiness, and when the chance, or is it something that can kind of come from spiritual curiosity and be transformed or transmuted into spiritual longing?
Well, we have to think about, where does spiritual longing come from? And spiritual longing comes from an essence that we call the spirit. We talk about three immortal principles. We talk about what we call the attentional principle, or Purusha, which is an intentional consciousness within us. This is the part of us that can do spiritual work. We talk about the spiritual heart, spirit, or in the East it's called the Surat. And it is a center of love and altruism, wanting to help. And when it begins to feel, as it were, homesick, then it starts to say, I want to go back to my source. I want to go back to God. And sometimes when we're in the presence of spiritual beings, it awakens this spirit within us. And it awakens this longing inside of us that we want to go home. We want to go back to God. And so there is a specific meditation that we teach in our meditation trainings called Nada Yoga that allows the spirit to actually open up these blocked channels that separated from God, from its origin, and allow it to go back home. And so typically it's by contact with a lot of spiritual beings that this is awakened within you. And I can say from my own spiritual quest, and any of the readers who want to read about where I come from can go to the website, mudraasham.com, and go under About and read my spiritual journey. You can read about how I became a spiritual teacher and the experiences I had along the way. But I can say that from my own experience, being around highly spiritual beings awakened this spiritual longing in me.
So I think just trying to link together some of the thoughts from our previous episodes, and again going back to this question about God, George. So I heard you use that term there in your response to Rahul, kind of colloquially, right? Like we want to return to God. Or when I hear you describe the fulfillment that entering onto some part of this journey and the unification that happens, what that provides to you. It sounds very similar to me to the way other guests we've had describe their experience of God, right? Or their experience of awakening to something bigger than themselves. And they're calling it by different names, and they have different degrees of I guess, fervor, and particularness in terms of their adherence to one path or viewpoint. But I think that this piece is so crucial and important for folks to kind of disentangle, because I think when people awaken that spiritual longing to some degree, you spoke about that dark band of the planes, where there is oppression, where there is dictatorship, where there is misunderstanding or the misuse of spiritual power. And I think that people, when they embark on this journey or they restart it, they often encounter things that kind of confuse them and throw them off, that make them say, okay, well, I thought I was interested in this, but I thought I really wanted to join this church, and I believed, and I wanted to experience that fulfillment that you're talking about, George. But then I didn't like their doctrine, or I didn't like the people that were there, or I didn't like the way that they asked me, or I ended up in a cult, or X, Y, or Z. So I think I just think it's really important to make sense of this. And I think the journey you're describing is an inner journey. You talked about faith, you talked about attentional and intuitive practices that take us there. So it's like where it's the inner journeys, right? You're not going to build a rocket ship and go find God on Mars or in the asteroid belt, right? If you're building a rocket ship, it's going to be inside you. But would you agree that the folks that I'm referencing, their experiences are referring to some similar experience, like on this continuum that you've been describing?
Well, what I can say is that in every spiritual tradition, so people identify with a different spiritual essence. So if you are a Christian or a Jew, you may identify with the center. We call it in our tradition the moon soul. You might call it the Christ child, the nephesh. And when you look on the inner horizon from this perspective, here you see the Heavenly Father God. And so that's the form of God that they worship, the form of God to whom they ask. Now, if you go to a yogi, they identify with another center that we call cosmic consciousness. They look on their inner horizon and they are seeing Brahman. They're seeing the yogi preceptor who is guiding them on the path to realize Brahman. If you go on a super cosmic path, you identify with what we call a super cosmic seed atom, a super cosmic state of identity. You look on the inner horizon and you're seeing, oh, look, on the inner horizon, there's Lord Shiva. Or on another path, and they're exactly identical, nodal point by nodal point. They're exactly the same amount, but the content, the archetypes within them are different. You look on a Muslim path and you see the light in the sky, the divine light of Allah, and you say, well, that's the supreme God. But what they don't understand is that if you do a practice that focuses your mind on this perspective and you identify with it, then that's going to be the horizon towards which you move. And what happens for most people is they never take the time to say, okay, well, I'm on this horizon, looking at this horizon. What if I go over here and I go to this Vishnu path and I look at, when I'm identified with that, I see that Krishna is the supreme deity. So one of the things about the continuum of consciousness, and I invite everybody to read about it, go to the website mudraasham.com, go to OpenStax and read the article, The Great Continuum of Consciousness. You can see the segments of it that we just started to describe in this webinar. But because we're only looking at our particular viewpoint of God, we say, well, no, that's wrong. God isn't like Shiva. God is like the light in the sky. Or God is like Krishna and Radha. Or God is this eternal origin of light from which my spirit dwells in the second transcendental path. So when we understand this entire continuum to see, well, what are people identifying with? And therefore that colors their perception of what divine is. So what form of God do you want? Every form of God that has ever been visualized or created in the human mind, has ever been experienced, is on this continuum of light. And so people choose the God that they want to worship. But what we often say is that if there is such a thing as God, we want you to experience it. We don't want you to simply believe in it. We want you to actually go to that location where God dwells. So you can say, yes, this is the God that the Christians and Jews believe in. This is the God that they talk about, the ascended masters talk about. This is the form of God that is known to those who are in the theosophical tradition. And so it's a matter of having the actual experience, the actual unfoldment by which you can experience this. And what I want to say, to kind of hooking it again to what you were saying, we talk about when people begin this spiritual quest, we call it the aspirant stage of spirituality. It's like spiritual dating, right? You try on different stuff. You try on this guru. I don't like that guru. Okay. Then you try on, I'm going to become a Christian. And you try that on and you say, those guys are crazy. All right. And then you go and say, I'm going to become a Buddhist. You try that on and you do that for a while and say, nah, it's not right. But eventually you're going to find something that totally resonates you, that lights you up inside, that says, yes, this is it. And when you find that, then you find your genuine spiritual path, and then you pursue that. Once you find that, you're initiated into it, and you pursue it assiduously, continuously, regularly. Then you become what we call a disciple. And when you finish your spiritual journey in whatever spiritual tradition, you become what we call a master or an initiate. So a person starting a Buddhist path as a new initiate, and they move along that track all the way, they get all the way through the mirror of the cosmic level, they get all the way up into the supercosmic chakras, they merge into that light from which they were born. At that point, they become an initiate, they become a master of Buddhism. And this is possible on every path.
Yeah, that what you just said there, George, I feel like this particular piece that we're on right now is really interesting to me. I think as I've been mentioning to Gabe, I'm like, recently being in the last couple of years, I've been thinking a lot more about, should I, commit right, to a particular body of institution or way of thinking or body of knowledge, right, and a particular community. And I've felt this hesitation, and we've had this conversation with a number of people, and a lot of them point to start experimenting, start putting yourself in process of finding the thing that you connect with. And then there's actually a power to committing and then being within a system, not as better or worse than any other system, but it's the system that you commit to. And it's actually about the commitment more than anything, and being in process that you're going to really gain the value, or experience the value more than gain the value of spiritual practice. And I'm hearing sort of that same narrative, which is a really good reminder in what you're saying. And if I'm hearing correctly, George, you're saying it doesn't really matter. Like, it's not like any one is better or worse than the other. They all offer a path to evolve into higher states of consciousness. Am I hearing all that correctly?
Well, the image that comes to mind right now is a park that has a lot of different trails. One trail goes to the top of this mountain over here. This trail winds around the lake. This trail goes over through the forest. This trail, winds up and goes across the bridge. So if you are seeking to gain union with Krishna Radha, then you probably want to select a Vishnu path on the supercosmic realm. If your objective to say, I really want to realize Brahman, that's the whole totality of my existence. That's why I live, that's why I breathe. Then you want to find a yogi preceptor. If you want to say, well, I feel myself that I am this spirit that dwells high in the great continuum of consciousness up in the transcendental realms, and I feel this great longing, I want to go back home. Well, then you probably want to find a Satguru. So it really depends on what is it that you are looking for. Now, one of the things that we discovered in Mudra Asham by getting this entire map is that there is an actual pattern behind this ensouling entity within each individual that leads them to completion in the subtle realm, in the planetary realm, in the transplanetary realm, in the cosmic, all 5 cosmic initiations, on whatever supercosmic paths with which they are aligned, on all 8 of the transcendental paths. And so if you can follow the track, unfold yourself along that track, ultimately you're going to get the whole thing, not just I've opened this Vishnu path. I've moved my moon soul or Christ child nucleus of identity. I moved it into the presence of the divine, and now I am a saint, and God anoints me with the light, and I am able to give the love to all human beings. Or I have now realized through the grace of my Guru Dev, I have now realized Brahman. I am now one with God. Okay? The whole thing. So when we discover the map of consciousness that includes all of these different levels, then it provides I want to say, a complete picture. So ultimately, we are aligned with a certain supercosmic path. There's an essence that we call the supercosmic soul dwells in one of these paths. And so when we complete that, then we have completed our supercosmic journey. And then we also have to complete each of our transcendental aspects of the journey. But there is a complete map. And if we actualize that innate pattern within us, we're going to open up all these different levels.
George, I want to ask you about tradition and innovation. Mm-hmm. So, Mudra Asham system that you've created, you're obviously drawing on a lot of traditional sources and learning. But it relates with this question that Rahul was just asking, because I think when you look at modern people, I think a lot of folks do not resonate with a traditional path. They want to experience something new. That's why you have something that feels more true to their personal experience. So you have this proliferation of new age teachers, or Instagram gurus, or kind of things like that, which shouldn't all be, maybe that sounds derisive, but it's not to write them off. Actually, it's just to say, look, there's all of this invention of new religion, invention of new pathways, but then you also within that get an increased, well, I shouldn't say increased, but there is, just like in any traditional context, there is the prospect of charlatanism and superficiality, or choosing something that doesn't really lead you somewhere substantive, but just kind of affirms whatever your limited, inner horizon, to use your language, was providing you before. This is just kind of a confirmation bias that leads you around in a circle. So, when you see something like that, it's like, well, if you think about it that way, it's like you should choose something traditional. You should choose something with a teacher, someone who knows something, who can verify something in you. And yet, on the other hand, and thinking about you as the creator of your own system, at a certain point, what can someone external validate for you? You're receiving something internally from whatever language you're using. You're receiving something from God, from an understanding that allows you to share and become a master. So how do you, and I'm curious about your personal experience with that, of how you're navigating that tension and that dialectic. And then therefore, what advice do you have for Rahul, for example, and the people out there, in terms of determining the pathways that you pursue? How do you create structure and a fail-safe that you are doing something valuable that's going to take you where you want to go, but at the same time create space for innovation, honesty to your personal experience? And in this modern world, when all these traditions that you're referencing from around the world, they don't exist in their little particular pockets anymore. We have the internet, we have globalization. It's all one big mashup of ideas. In our blood, it's mashed up. People are mixes. And so, yeah, how do we navigate that terrain and create something authentic in both those aspects, to ourselves and to the journey?
Well, the first thing is you have to start with the touchstone of your own inner truth. Where am I today? Where am I going? Now, you mentioned something about the psychic realm, and actually one of my books is called The Psychic Realm: Finding Safe Passage Through the Worlds of Illusion, and I explain about the planes of the psychic realm. I think I mentioned them earlier. And we describe exactly what's in there and how people become waylaid by a lot of very excited ideas. Now, you understand that people will teach according to the level of their development. So if you have a person who is 4 years old and they have a 2-year-old sibling, they're going to teach according to their knowledge at the level of being 4 years old. But then as you get older, you have a greater comprehension, a greater knowledge of things. Now, a lot of people get their information through inspiration. They get an intuitive download and they run with that. But one of the keynotes that we talk about in developing this spiritual maturity is that we not only have to be able to tap into intuition and sources of guidance, but we need to have discernment. We need to know exactly who are we? Where do these communications come from? How are they relevant? Now, I want to say that spiritual growth is a very creative process. I like to think of the example of a musician, and they start out and they start playing folk music, and then they get into rock and roll, and then they say, well, I want to experiment with country music, and you know what, I think I want to see what jazz is about. And they evolve and they grow. Well, it's the same way that we evolve and grow, and in the process, in this crucible of our inner growth, it is a fountain of creativity. And so if you had asked me at age 18 and you said, well, you know, in your future, George, you were going to write 34 books. You're going to write hundreds of blog articles. You're going to do hundreds of courses. I would have looked at you and said, you've been smoking some bad stuff. Right? But we evolve, we grow. And so it's important that we remain in touch with this core of truth, this core of essence, this core sense of what is our purpose? What is our direction in life? We need to take direction from that. We need to be true to this inmost essence within us, and then, you know, move from there. Because there are any number of people who want to convince us, oh, well, you know, you've got to become a member of this group. You've got to join my religion. It's the only true path. And another person saying, no. It looks like this. You need to shave your head. You need to wear orange robes. Come with us. The other person says, no, you just have to go to church, believe in Jesus, and, you know, all blessings will come to you. But we have to follow the touchstone of truth. We have to discover what is it that resonates within us. So you hear many different messages, and one lights you up inside, says, yes, okay, that's what I've been looking for. This is what I want. Because the many different forms of the divine that dwell on the continuum, so many different forms of the divine.
Yeah, if I were to try, George, to synthesize, you know, a lot of our conversation, building off of what you just said, right? There's a, you know, this map that you've built out, the continuum of consciousness is something we can use as a guide, right? To see, hey, like these are different places I might already be and different places I can be through spiritual work and spiritual growth and accessing the creativity of the spiritual path. And as we look at that and we're kind of the path to finding a consistent practice is to experiment, to search, and then to constantly align what we're seeing externally with ourselves internally, right? And saying, hey, what is, you know, you use the word discernment, right? It's like, what is resonating with us truly? And that is, you know, there's this compass within us that will help us choose between a path that, you know, like one person might come to Christianity from a place of resonance, and somebody else might come from a place of being kind of seduced by what they're offering, and their experience of that path is going to be completely different. Is what I'm sensing from what you're saying, and so sort of what I'm taking away right now is search, experiment, notice your inner truth. And once you find a place where you feel resonance, commit, practice, enjoy the creative process, and observe the evolution through these stages of consciousness as part of the path. And to what Gabe was talking about earlier in terms of, you know, pot at the end of the rainbow, a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Maybe there is a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, but there's also the journey of navigating or being on the rainbow, you know, as or navigating across the rainbow as you search, you know, for that pot of gold. Yeah, just wanted to play that synthesis by you and see if that, you know, how that lands with you and if there's any key piece that I'm missing from what we discussed today.
Well, I think the main thing that I would point out is that when we move from the station of being completely immersed in the conscious mind, and then suddenly we move out of that through whatever experience we have, we say, oh, there's so much more than what I experience in this immediate framework of my conscious mind. It is a path of questioning. It's a time when you're going to become very confused. You're going to find conflict between ideas, which is right, which is wrong. Which is the one I should do? Let me try this. No, I'm not getting what I want. Let me try that. But at a certain point, when you find the right path for you, you're going to have that inner sense of resonance, that inner sense of acceptance, that inner sense of, yes, this is what I need to do. Almost a sense of destiny. And then you will pursue that path that you are led to do. Now, I want to let you know, in my spiritual history, and I've written 2 books about this subject, I was involved in different spiritual cults. Now, I want to let you know that spiritual cults can completely make you completely crazy. You can also gain great value from them. I do not encourage people to join spiritual cults. I have 2 books, Religions, Cults, and Terrorism. What the heck are we doing? And my newest one is called The Path Across the Sky. I talk more about these themes. But the point of the matter is that if you are sincere to say, I want to grow into my potential, you think about a little sprout. I say, I'm just a little sprout right now, but I want to become a tree. Then you're going to do everything you can to nurture that spiritual essence within you. And you're going to learn, you're going to have experiences, you're going to be a human crucible. You're going to transmute your experiences, both personal and spiritual, and you are going to grow. And when you finish this process of growth, you will become an initiate, a master in whatever tradition you ultimately decide upon. So in our tradition, we say once you finish the subtle, planetary, transplanetary, cosmic, supercosmic, and you reach up onto the 7th stage of spirituality, what we call the bridge path. At that level, there's the potential for mastery over all the different supercosmic paths, all the different transcendental paths, through the entire cosmic, entire transplanetary, planetary, subtle, even coming all the way down into the personality. So in each tradition, there is a different ideal of mastery. Maybe that looks like a Buddha. Maybe that looks like a saint. Maybe that looks like a person who is at the feet of Lord Krishna. Maybe it looks like a person who has moved into the courts of the Lord, surrounding the light of Allah. But whatever you choose, if you become a disciple and you work the path to the end, you will become a master. You will actualize your potential along that path, and you will become a mouthpiece for its wisdom. You become an exemplar of its virtues, and you will utilize the abilities that are available upon that path to serve other people.
George, thank you so much for sharing with us today, just everything that you've taken the time to share with us and our listeners about your own experiences, the system of understanding and wisdom that you have tapped into and developed. And yeah, it's just beautiful. I really appreciate you making that space for us today. As a last question, and maybe it's a last question or a second to last question. I don't know. I don't know what's on Rahul's mind over there. But as a last question, I'm curious about any comment you might have about the role of conversations like these. We are not devotees in your system of practice, right? We're coming together in the I Ching. There's hexagram 13, the fellowship with others. Talk about meeting others in the field. You meet others in the field, in the open space, and through that, there's this exchange of ideas. There's something that happens. We're not doing the practices right now. We're just, to Rahul's point, we're just talking, and maybe we're just, scratching that itch of curiosity. Maybe you could critique that. But what is the role of these kinds of conversations, or for folks who are listening to this, what is the value of participating through their listenership in conversations such as these, and what role does that play in your broader understanding of things?
Well, what happens is that in many spiritual traditions, they look at the inner horizon, they move through the archetypes of their particular path, and they say, well, this is the only way. And I don't want to hear anything from anybody else. I mean, I've got the total truth here. But maybe if we talk to one another from wherever we are, if you really had a dialogue and you really came to understand mind to mind, heart to heart, spirit to spirit, what is it like to be a Muslim? What is it like to be a Christian? And to really understand, okay, well, look, I'm looking at this part of the continuum, looks like this to me, and you're looking at that part of the continuum, looks like that to you. But the way that we come to understand each other and gain tolerance for one another is that, we have these dialogues. We actually come to understand, okay, well, he's looking at this, I'm looking at that. And, for both of us, it's a valid path. So I just want to tie in something I was starting earlier. So I was talking about the 7 different ray paths in the first exoteric initiation. I went to the point, I talked about the social justice Christianity, and then the 6th ray is the evangelical Christianity, and the 7th is the symbolic Kabbalah. So what happens is when Christians, evangelical Christians, talk to Catholics, they say, no, it's not like this, it's like this. We're seeing these archetypes. Don't you see this? And they say, no, it's like this. Well, I think it's real important that we come to understand that we're viewing different archetypes, and out of those archetypes, we bring out creativity, we bring out understanding, we bring out, deep appreciation of ideas. But we need to appreciate that there are many, many, many archetypes. And so we can learn from everyone. You can learn from somebody who is a worshiper of Lord Rama. You can learn from somebody who is a Muslim. You can learn from somebody who is a practitioner of the Surat Shabd Yoga on the 2nd Transcendental Path. You can learn from a person who is a yogi by listening and finding out, okay, they're exploring this level of the continuum. And it looks like that from their particular perspective. They're on the first ray, that's why they're seeing that. Well, that's okay. In an orchestra, okay, there's not just the strings. All right? There's the drums, the percussion, there's the brass, there's the piano, there's the singer. We need every part of the orchestra to play the melody. So we need to understand why it is a person has that different perspective. What is it that they're experiencing spiritually? Where are they in the continuum? What are they looking at on the continuum? And to understand, okay, well, that's the reason they're seeing that, because they're at that level of the continuum. And maybe if they move over here or they move further along the path, they're going to see this additional content. So dialogue is valuable, but it means that we really need to approach dialogue as a way of understanding, okay, so what is this person seeing? What is this person experiencing? Where are they on this continuum of consciousness? And so when we're able to do that, we're not hating one another. We're saying, oh, well, let me learn from you about this. I've never experienced that. So,
yeah. And George, just want to thank you so much for being a part of that process with us. I think that's really what we hope to embody, as part of this project and as part of these types of conversations, and really feel the generosity of your time and your wisdom and your perspective, and just feel grateful that we've had the opportunity to hear from you, to learn from you, and looking forward to delving more deeply into some of your ideas that you've captured, in so many different places. So, I just want to end from my end with that, sense of gratitude for you.
well, think about it this way. Both of you kept me out of trouble for a little while.
Hopefully not too long.
Yeah.
Can't learn without some good trouble. Well, George, thank you so much for joining us. Folks listening, check out George's work. You can find all the links in our show description. I think, George, I was touched today by many things you shared, but by the openness and kindness of your spirit, the generosity of your time. So thank you. And for folks listening to us, as always, in the theme of what George has been sharing with us, we wish you well on your journey and path. We hope that whatever you're choosing to do, that this conversation can be part of a spark to lead you somewhere meaningful, take you deeper on your own journey to wherever you need to go, and that through that process, it can benefit all of us. And so I wish you well in turning this turning it into more than just an idea, and into something real and practical for yourself. As always, if you enjoy listening to this show, please share it with a friend who you think might benefit from hearing these words and ideas. Please leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. And again, check out the links in the show description. You can join our newsletter, find links to all of George's work there. And in the meantime, we are wishing you well. We will catch you next month for our next episode of this season, exploring God from however many angles we can come up with. And in the meantime, we're wishing you well. So take care, and we will see you out there. See you next time.